It's Thursday, June 19th, 2025, and we have an enhanced risk of severe weather out here in the mid-Atlantic, accompanied by a slight risk of severe weather, which extends from the same region all the way up into the northeast. And we have another slight risk of severe weather up here in the northern plains. And we have a slight risk surrounding our other risk areas out here in the eastern United States, which extends down into the southeast. Then our marginal risk in the eastern United States covers that same main risk area up here in the mid-Atlantic to northeast, but it extends further down into the southeast. Then our marginal up here in the northern plains extends down into the central plains and back into the mountain west. Today's main threat is going to be wind. We have a 30% moderate chance of wind out here in the mid-Atlantic, surrounded by a 15% slight risk of wind stretching from the mid-Atlantic up into the northeast. And then we have just a broad area of anywhere that severe winds could be possible, extending down into the southeast and up here in our northern to central plains risk area as well. And then we have a 15% slight risk of hail up here in our northern plains risk area. It's kind of interesting how our risk areas have kind of traded risk. Like over here we have mostly hail, then over here we have mostly wind, but we'll dive more into why that is in a bit. Then our sole tornado risk for the day is going to be a 2% marginal up here extending from the mid-Atlantic into the northeast. Then we have a day 2 slight risk of severe weather up here in the northern plains, which will pose all hazards of severe weather. And what's interesting is that a tornado threat could actually materialize in this region, being pretty robust depending on if we're expected to get any storms out here and if they're expected to be discrete. Here's our simulated reflectivity from our main risk area, and immediately we can see that we get some storms out here in front of a cold front in our mid-Atlantic risk area today. And this is a snapshot from early afternoon, and as we move further into the day, so mid-afternoon to evening, that's when that main threat is expected to materialize, when these storms really organize around the mid-Atlantic region. And then up here further into the northeast, we see some storms, and if they're able to cluster together, there could be an isolated wind threat up here as well. And these storms are expected to push off into the Atlantic by early evening to the night hours. Here's our northern plains risk area, and certainly a little bit more interesting than our mid-Atlantic risk area. We see a couple of discrete cells up here in Canada, and also a couple down here in Wisconsin. I'm going to actually say that these could be capable of all hazards today, even though the tornado risk with these is going to be very, very small. And these are going to sprout up along a boundary right here, so a cold front. And as we go into the late afternoon to mid-evening hours, we see just an explosion of convection right here, aided by the low-level jet and forcing. And these storms are actually pretty much all expected to have a supercellular nature. We can see that all of these are basically rotating with pretty formidable updrafts the HRRR is actually predicting. Now, surprisingly, the tornado risk with these storms is actually supposed to be pretty low. I'll show you why that is in a minute. But the hail risk with these is expected to be pretty formidable. We could see giant hail up to 3 inches in this region, absolutely, and possibly even some severe winds. And these storms are expected to track along that cold front. And as we can see, we have a lot of storm splitting, and that's going to be because of our straight photographs. And these storm interactions will likely just turn these storms into a cluster moving through Minnesota and into Wisconsin by Friday morning. Here's our upper air maps, and we can see in the mid-Atlantic, right in front of this trough, we actually see a big area of lifting. Those are where our storms are going to be today. And up here in the northern plains, we also see an area of increased flow, helping with that large level forcing. And as we get closer to storm time in the northern plains, we actually see our jet ramp up quite a bit, with really forcing from all angles. We have it back over here, and then with that cold front, that's what's expected to touch off those storms in that region. And another thing interesting to note, these are our 700 millibar winds, and out here, our storm sustaining ingredient, so bulk shear, is actually not going to be super plentiful, but we have a strong 700 millibar jet, which is going to help to sustain these storms longer in the mid-Atlantic. Here is a sounding from our mid-Atlantic region, and our photograph doesn't really look really impressive at all. We have basically no low-level helicity and no low-level shear, and our bulk shear is definitely going to be lower than what we would like it to see at around 27 knots. We have absolutely no veering in our winds. All these wind barbs are pointing the exact same direction, and our lapse rates are going to be pretty weak, so that's going to really diminish that threat for hail. But we do have a decent amount of cape up near our freezing level, so hail is definitely still a possibility out here, although it's not expected to be large. Our low-level lapse rates are going to be higher, so that's helping with that non-zero threat for tornadoes and that threat for severe winds. Our lowest cloud level is going to be slightly above that 1 kilometer threshold for tornadoes that we'd like to see, but sometimes funky things can happen. So definitely still low enough to support that tornado threat. We have good moisture out here to support that wind and tornado threat and help sustain these storms longer. We have very little bit of dry air loft, which could help to accelerate those downdrafts and help support that severe wind threat. But that's not looking like it's really going to do that much. Our cape out here is definitely sufficient, nearing 3,000, and our precipitable water is going to be quite high, around 1.99 inches. So definitely wetter, more outflowy storms, and that could also help to support that threat for damaging winds. Our downdraft cape is not going to be super high, but our 3 cape, so our surface cape, is going to be over 130. So definitely a more unstable environment, which would help to support that tornado threat. So in summary, it looks like wind is going to be the main concern with these storms, with the possibility of small hail and the conditional risk for a tornado or two, which would probably be spin up tornadoes along that line of storms we're expecting to see in the mid-Atlantic today. Here is our northern plains risk area, and immediately our photograph looks way more interesting. We see some curvature in the lower levels and a large elongation indicating that deep layer shear. And just like we expected down here, our deep layer shear is going to be over that 40 knot threshold. So definitely enough to help support those strong sustaining updrafts today. Our lower level helicity is going to be above 200 and our lower level shear is going to be of 20 knots. So there are some tornado ingredients out here today, but in a minute, I'm going to show you why that's really not likely at all. We see some veering in the winds to help sustain and spin those updrafts. Our lowest cloud level is going to be higher, which would support a stronger wind risk and diminish that threat for tornadoes. We see a lot of capping around our surface, so definitely a pretty stable surface. But after we get above that surface layer, we see our mix rates are going to be 8.8 Celsius decreasing per kilometer. Couple that with a decent amount of cape near our freezing layer, so definitely very large hail is in play for these storms out here in the northern plains. We do see some dry air loft, which could help to accelerate those downdrafts and provide lift for those storms. Our cape out here is going to be nearing 3,000 at 2,800, so definitely enough storm fuel for these storms. Our precipitable water is going to be 1.42 inches, so not super high, but definitely not low at all, which could help to accelerate those downdrafts. Our downdraft cape is going to be 1,600, so that's pretty high for these storms, so definitely the possibility of severe winds out here. And then our 3 cape is going to be pretty low, so definitely indicative of a more stable surface, and that's what's really going to diminish that tornado threat and make it basically zero out in this area today. So the main threat for this region is going to be very large hail, and then a smaller possibility for severe winds, which is really going to be diminished by that more stable surface environment. And then there is the possibility for a tornado out in this region, but it's pretty much close to zero.